investing $50 billion through 2026. The headline that's really raising a lot of eyebrows from your company, Jim.
Today, China controls over 70% of the world's production of rare magnets. And it's this dominance, quietly built over decades through heavy investment, resource acquisition, and strategic trade partnerships, that has come back to haunt Western automakers in ways few predicted. The newest and strictest Chinese export policies have pushed many manufacturers, particularly American automakers, into crisis. The first big casualty was none other than Ford Motor Company, an industrial icon and pillar of America's auto legacy. The story truly began on May 20th, 2025, when Ford abruptly announced it was halting production at its critical Chicago assembly plant on the city's south side, a facility responsible for flagship models like the Ford Explorer, the luxurious Lincoln Aviator, and perhaps most politically sensitive of all, the Police Interceptor Utility, which is America's best-selling law enforcement vehicle. The reason? A sudden shortage of small but indispensable rare earth magnets sourced almost entirely from China, components without which modern steering, electric drive units, and critical electronic subsystems simply can't be built. These parts might seem trivial at first glance, but in an era of lean, just-in-time manufacturing, a missing magnet can stop a billion-dollar production line cold. And that's precisely what happened. The plant shut down from May 20th through May 28th, leaving Ford scrambling, union workers anxious, and policymakers outraged. This crisis didn't emerge from thin air. Just a year earlier, in April 2024, the Chinese government introduced stricter export conditions, requiring overseas automakers to apply for special export licenses to secure precious minerals. The stated justification was national security, but industry observers saw it as part of the broader, increasingly tense U.S.-China trade rivalry. Ford's president and CEO Jim Farley explained to reporters in early June 2025 that while Ford had tracked the evolving policy, the speed and depth of the new restrictions were worse than anticipated. Before the rule change, Ford's just-in-time logistics meant parts arrived right when they were needed, cutting costs and keeping inventories minimal, a system that worked flawlessly for years, until the geopolitical climate shifted. The result was immediate. Over 4,800 hourly workers and 500 salaried employees at the Chicago plant were temporarily laid off under the United Auto Workers Union agreement. They kept health benefits, but uncertainty about future work weighed heavily. The most symbolic blow came with production delays of the Police Interceptor Utility vehicle, a workhorse for law enforcement agencies nationwide. Though police departments reported no major operational impact, the fear that new units wouldn't arrive as planned touched a nerve in both public safety circles and Washington, D.C. Ford resumed production on May 28 when shipments finally cleared customs, but the damage was done. The story dominated headlines, and the political fallout was swift. President Donald Trump, who had long criticized American dependence on Chinese manufacturing, seized the moment. He openly supported lawmakers from the Department of Energy and Department of Defense calling for robust domestic mining and magnet production. In campaign speeches, including fiery rallies in industrial states like Michigan and Ohio, Trump argued that decades of outsourcing had weakened national security and threatened American workers' livelihoods. He didn't stop there. Trump resurrected earlier criticisms of the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, passed under President Biden, that encouraged automakers to accelerate EV production but, in his view, failed to ensure domestic access to raw materials like lithium and rare earth elements. Trump warned that by handing the keys to the Communist Party, America's EV ambitions had made automakers hostage to Chinese policy changes. Meanwhile, Ford faced another controversy tied to China. Its canceled $3.5 billion battery plant project in Detroit, initially planned in partnership with China's CATL. That deal had drawn bipartisan scrutiny from lawmakers worried about Chinese influence over American EV supply chains. After intense pressure, including calls from Congress to see internal documents, Ford walked away, further straining its production plans. Yet Ford wasn't alone in feeling the squeeze. General Motors, during its April 2025 earnings call, told investors it had to slow production of flagship EVs like the Chevrolet Blazer and certain Cadillac models due to delayed magnet shipments. GM's president and CEO Mark Rice noted that while they had enough inventory to keep assembly lines running into late 2025, the ongoing volatility was a major concern, and a mid-size EV model originally scheduled for late 2024 had already been postponed. Toyota, the world's largest automaker by volume, also faced bottlenecks in its North American factories. Their RAV4, Corolla, and Lexus RX hybrids, built in Kentucky and Indiana, rely heavily on neodymium magnets in electric steering systems and drive units. Executives admitted production had to slow to stretch limited stocks, though complete shutdowns were avoided. Industry-wide, frustration turned to action. The Alliance for Automotive Innovation, representing most major automakers, formally requested federal support, tax credits for new mines, streamlined environmental permits, and research funding to develop refining capacity inside the U.S. By mid-2025, the Departments of Energy and Defense committed over $200 million under the Defense Production Act to help build domestic supply chains. One high-profile project, a rare earth refining plant in California, started construction, but it won't reach full capacity until at least 2027. That leaves American automakers exposed to further shocks. In the meantime, companies began looking for technological workarounds. GM and others revived interest in induction motors, which rely on copper coils rather than permanent magnets. Tesla already uses this approach in the Model S Plaid, but it comes with trade-offs. Induction motors weigh more and can be less efficient at lower speeds, challenging EV range targets. At the same time, pilot projects launched in Michigan, Ohio, and Ontario to recycle magnets from scrapped electronics and older vehicles. While promising, these projects remain small-scale and aren't yet commercially viable. The crisis also hit newer EV players. In May 2025, Rivian announced a 2-year delay in launching the R2 crossover, shifting its mass release from 2026 to spring 2028, citing the unpredictability of Chinese supply chains. To save money, Rivian decided to build the R2 at its older Illinois factory rather than its new Georgia facility, hoping to save $2 billion. Lucid Motors, known for its luxury EVs, hinted at similar delays for its upcoming Gravity SUV, though without a formal statement. Analysts now agree the shortage of rare earth magnets has become the biggest challenge for the U.S. auto industry in 2025, affecting not just EV production, but also gasoline vehicles, which use these magnets in power steering, sensors, and motor assemblies. The stakes are immense. Even a single missing magnet can stop an entire production line. Ford's Jim Farley warned that each new revision to Chinese export rules adds cost, uncertainty, and risk. And China's dominant position allows it to change the rules faster than automakers can adapt. President Trump and allies framed the Ford shutdown as a wake-up call, an urgent reason to rebuild U.S. mining and refining capacity and end dependence on China. His message resonated deeply in auto-heavy states, fueling campaign momentum. Yet for automakers, the crisis is about survival, not slogans. GM, Toyota, and others now face a race against time. Either develop alternative motor designs that bypass rare earth magnets, ramp up recycling, or pressure Washington to accelerate domestic mining. The stakes go beyond corporate profit. National security, manufacturing jobs, and the future of American innovation all hang in the balance. Ford, for now, has resumed production and reported no further shutdowns, but the company remains wary. Industry insiders say the risk of new disruptions remains high until domestic supply chains mature. Even broader geopolitical implications loom. The auto sector's crisis exposes how a single country's export policy can ripple through thousands of factories worldwide, affecting police vehicle fleets, consumer prices, and union contracts. It has turned rare earth magnets, once an obscure technical detail, into a centerpiece of global economic rivalry. For now, while construction begins on U.S. refining plants and research into alternatives ramps up, the timeline is tight. Full-scale domestic magnet production likely won't arrive before 2027, leaving at least 2 more years of risk. Automakers continue lobbying for tax incentives, environmental fast-tracking, and direct government investment to speed up mining projects in places like California and Texas. Meanwhile, pilot recycling projects experiment with extracting magnets from old EV motors, wind turbines, and electronic waste, hopeful, but not yet large enough to stabilize supply. The fallout also led to intense debate over industrial strategy. Should the U.S. decouple from Chinese supplies entirely, or diversify supply by partnering with allies like Australia and Canada? While policymakers weigh these choices, production lines remain vulnerable. Every automaker now keeps an eye on the daily status of critical shipments from China, knowing that a single container stuck at port could halt billions in production. And beyond Ford, GM, and Toyota, even smaller players feel the shockwaves. Rivian's delay of the R2 and Lucid's quieter struggles show how newer companies, built around fragile global supply chains, are even more exposed. As of July 2025, Ford's operations are back to normal. But the lesson is clear. In the modern automotive industry, even the smallest part can have the biggest impact. The Ford shutdown started as a local production hiccup, but became a symbol of broader geopolitical rivalry, sparking debate from the factory floor to Congress. And until domestic supply chains catch up, the entire U.S. auto sector must navigate an unpredictable landscape where trade policy, national security, and manufacturing intersect. The rare earth magnet shortage has become a defining issue of the decade, forcing automakers to rethink design choices, supplier relationships, and political strategy alike. In the years ahead, whether the U.S. can secure a stable supply of these tiny but critical components may determine not just the fate of car models or corporate profits, but the global balance of industrial power itself. And so, as 2025 continues, the shutdown of a single Ford plant in Chicago stands as both a warning and a rallying cry. The modern supply chain is more fragile and more political than anyone dared imagine, and every part, no matter how small, carries weight measured not only in grams but in billions of dollars, thousands of jobs, and national strategy itself.